We're very pleased to start the second panel. You'll have a chance to hear from practitioners, and we're really delighted to have a great set of people who've joined us today. We hope that we find this to be a nice complement to the morning panel. So we're really delighted to have folks who are out in the fields and can really provide some great insight into some of the questions that were raised earlier today. So I also just wanted to reflect a moment on a question that came up at the break about how we're defining sustainable. And I'm sure that each of us here today could provide our own definitions of what we view as sustainable. But since it is in the title and it hasn't been explicitly mentioned, I think that in general that we do see this in a very holistic way, that we're talking about practices that are environmentally sustainable as well, or environmentally sound, environmentally responsible, environmentally regenerative, as well as economically viable and socially just, socially responsible. So that's a very holistic kind of perception. But again, I think, at some point maybe some of the speakers could reflect on that, but we're assuming also that this is something that's not an endpoint, a given definition, but it's a journey, it's a goal, and it's very contextual as well. So, we talk at the Berkeley Food Institute also about resilience, diversity, justice, and health as being key components of sustainability. But in any case, we're not going to get into details of definition because there are so many different interpretations, but is not something that you can easily put into a box the way maybe McDonald's wants to do. So. So with that, I want to introduce our second moderator for this panel, and that is John Wick, who's with the Marin Carbon Project, and he is doing some really amazing work as a livestock owner and producer himself in Marin County, and a lot of you have probably heard of the Marin Carbon Project. And so he's going to be our moderator. And actually, John has been engaged in some really interesting research with researchers at the University of California and others on carbon sequestration in his own right, so in his livestock operation. So there won't be really time to go into that, but at some point, John may want to comment on that as part of the conversation. So John, why don't you come on, start the panel, and you
down here.
Yeah, that's great. You can introduce our great speakers for today. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all coming here today. I'm grateful for you sharing your time with us. To begin with, I want to introduce, it's Will Harris, and Will is the recipient of an award yesterday, the Growing Green Award, and I thought we ought to give him a round of applause. And we've never had the opportunity to talk, but I understand you're a beef operator, is that correct? You do? Okay.
Formerly beef, now a number of species.
Okay, all right. We'll give you a platform to talk about that in detail. And then sitting next to me is Russ, and you're interested in, now I have it written down as pigs. Now, is there a difference between pigs and hogs, or do you do both?
It's pigs, hogs, collectively.
Pigs, hogs, okay. And you're quite passionate about that.
Very, very passionate.
I'd like to, we'll go into detail on that as well.
Hear the squeal.
Exactly. And then Rose and Ward are Californians, and you have a organic milk production operation in Central California?
Yes, we have the ABCs of organics. So we started almonds, beef, cheese, chickens, dairies, eggs, goats, sheep, and all the way to our newest project is olive oil.
Very good, very good. And you're the spokesperson for the operation, right?
Nope, we both are.
All right.
Yep. I'm the general and he's the detailed.
There you go. Okay. And I think you'll notice that we're all smiling up here. So I would venture to say that we actually enjoy what we're doing. Can you say that? So I actually don't own cattle. I wanted to make one clarification there. I borrow a herd of cattle as a management tool to promote native grass systems, and I'm getting quite good at it. And in my operation, I am trying to promote the native perennial systems as habitat for ground nesting birds, and I've been doing this now since 2003. And it's a lot of work, but it's the most fun I've ever had. And basically from that platform, I would like to just share this venue with you guys. We can all talk about our experiences managing these ecosystems to produce different things. And the word sustainable, I did want to drill into that a little bit. One of the things that helps me understand that is how you define your boundaries. So is your whole operation occurring within your boundaries, and what are your resources in terms of inputs and what leaves your system? And in the simplest form, the boundaries of an agricultural system, you've got this amazing input of energy from sunshine. And through photosynthesis and the abundance of atmospheric CO2, which actually is a resource, and nitrogen, which is the most abundant thing in the atmosphere, our art is to combine rainwater and those elements to create carbohydrates. Until I started my work, I didn't realize that all of the carbon and carbohydrates comes out of the air and nowhere else. And I can talk in detail later about how we have researched the process that resulted in some of that carbon ending up permanently and measurably in the soil, and we do have good data on that now. But that's what I'd like to kind of look at in our conversation is the boundaries of your system, and each of us here is actually an organic producer at this point, and for different philosophical or economic reasons, and that's a lot of what we could talk about here and share with this group. So, start. Okay, well, I guess I could just ask him some questions. Or no, he has a presentation. You want to explain who you are, what you're doing, and why we're lucky to have you here.
Well, I'm the one that's lucky to be here. Thank you for having me. Before I start, I'm from Georgia, so you California people need to set your listening back slower, because I'm going to speak slowly, and if you're listening fast and I'm speaking slow, we'll miss each other. But my great-grandfather, I guess the thing I'm most proud of on our farm is the way it has come full circle in the 150 years that my family has operated it. My great-grandfather came there in 1866 after what we call the Northern Invasion. And it was after the war. He and 100 emancipated slaves started there. I want you to listen to this. 100 employees. They raised a lot of different livestock species and vegetables on the farm. And it would have been done in that era in a way that was very high in terms of animal welfare and environmental sustainability, because all they had was the land and the herds and flocks. And it was what we call a sustenance farm, which meant its only function was to feed the people who worked the land. My grandfather took it over. He was more entrepreneurial. He turned it into a profit-producing farm. My father took over post-World War II. It was on his watch that we did what he did, what we all did farming in the United States in that post-World War II era. He did three things: commoditized, industrialized, and centralized. And under his watch, it became a monoculture of cattle in which he, later me, used all the tools that science gave us. Pesticides, chemical fertilizers, antibiotics, whatever else science gave us, GMOs later. I took over the farm and was fortunate that on my watch, I've taken it back to what my great-grandfather did. And today, we have over 100 employees, about 110. We raise, pasture-raised 5 red meat species, cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, 5 poultry species, chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, ducks. We raise pastured eggs, certified organic vegetables, and some other things. And now my children are on the farm. They're the 5th generation on the farm. But the full circle concept is what I'm proud of. You know, the first thing we did in the mid-90s is give up hormone implants, subtherapeutic antibiotics, and confinement feeding grain to cattle, monoculture cattle. And I thought that was all I had to do to be great. Later I realized I had to give up chemical fertilizers and pesticides on the pasture. Later realized you got to have other species, nature abhors a monoculture. Later realized I needed to have abattoirs to process them on the farm and not haul them 100 miles. So we built a red meat and poultry abattoir on the farm. And now I realize it's a journey, not a destination. We're still learning it. You know, when did I convert? We're still converting. You know, we're going to be converting for a long time. that's what we do. I guess later on we'll talk about how we do it. Thank you.
That was great. I did want to pay honor to your father, I think. He was charged to feed America, and he looked at what resources were available, and that was an honorable thing that he did. And it might not have been our best strategy, it turns out, but it was well intended.
Well, it was when my father and others industrialized post-World War II, it was wildly successful in accomplishing what it set out to accomplish. It made food cheap, abundant, and safe from the perspective you don't eat it and get an acute illness. It did that. It was wildly successful. When, unfortunately, there were unintended consequences that nobody knew about. Certainly nobody talked about it. When he first was sold ammonium nitrate fertilizer, chemical fertilizer, they gave him and all the other farmers a little jar and told them to go home, get out in the grass, and pour it in a pattern and water it. And of course, the next day or the next day, you could see the circle or your name or whatever it was you did in the grass with that ammonium nitrate fertilizer. The fact it oxidized the carbon in the soil and killed the microbes, you couldn't see that.
So thank you. Thank you for that. And then Russ, can you share with us your successes and give some backstory on who you are?
Yes, I sure will. I too am privileged and honored to be here among peers and friends, and yes, we are smiling. That hard work is fun too, And I really appreciate that panel before us with the scientists. Wow, I have a lot of hope about this movement. But I have a similar, I guess, story in that of transition and coming full circle. I'm actually a fifth-generation farmer of German immigrants that settled in a little hamlet called Frankenstein, Missouri, and that gets a lot of attention because it's the only town of its name in this country, and there's a Frankenstein, Germany, and there is a connection to the monster, by the way, but we don't grow Frankenstein food. The fact is I grew up in the 60s and 70s and have been raising pigs since I was 5 years old, given those kind of responsibilities, take care of the runt and orphan pigs, and so I've come from that kind of background about responsibility, but I also had the privilege of knowing what truly, when you talk about sustainability, unless we talk about sustaining families and communities as well as the other things we've mentioned, Ann, I think that's extremely important. And I saw at an early age how independent farming and sustainable farming actually sustained this little community. This little community of 30 people had, 2 grocery stores, a couple of bars, a restaurant, et cetera, because farmers reinvested. And to me, this is extremely important as we talk about sustainability and changing this style of livestock production because, basically in livestock and poultry, approximately 90% of what's raised is kind of in a captive situation by vertical integrators. And so that's really important, and why I appreciate what Will's done, and we're doing something similar, and that is to create a sustainable, holistic model that incorporates more of the value chain, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But as a young farmer, I very interested in pigs. I did have that passion. But along the way, after graduating from college and getting kind of from our land grant institution some of this, this aggressiveness about expanding and embracing some technological ideas, convinced my dad to go into a more industrial model. So I went from a sustainable family for generations into an industrial model so that we could support a couple of livings on the farm. And that included adopting the policy or the practice of subtherapeutic antibiotics in every ration of feed. In my pigs, we expanded the pig operation, had buildings where it was, you ran them through like a number, like a widget, and got caught up in that, unfortunately. And basically, whether I knew it or not, but I created a superbug. And I kind of learned some things about that. And there was a subtle kind of a transition in my life, basically. I didn't completely realize overnight that I was doing something wrong. I was actually president of the Missouri Pork Producers Association. I was kind of the youngest elected president at that time. It was a good trade organization at that time. But I had learned about some of the resistance. But it didn't hit home until I actually had a near-death experience with that in 1989, where I actually got gored by a boar that had this antibiotic-resistant pathogen that I actually created. And the doctors didn't know, and to no avail. After 6 treatments of the conventional antibiotics such as penicillin, in a month I was on my deathbed, ready to die with my legs swollen twice its size, and the disease going systemic. When I actually convinced my doctors that through serology tests from my farm, that I had exactly what those pigs had. Long story short, one antibiotic was sensitive to this disease, and it saved my life through IV. That's the transition that I liked it. I mean, that's when the transformation really occurred, where on my deathbed yet, I plotted a course on how to be more sustainable. Part of that was to throw those antibiotics and other unnecessary additives away, go into a more sustainable type of a situation, and clean herds and in a protocol that's very sustainable. But I did it. And that year, number one, because it was the right thing to do. I was very remorseful for what I had done to the food system, knowing that I had friends and families eating this stuff. Number two, I found out it was sustainable economically after a year when I saved $16,000 a year on my vet and healthcare bill. So I made a commitment to become an educator, demonstrator, I guess an evangelist of more sustainable agriculture. Started trying to teach the farmers that were kind of in that transition. You got to remember that people that raise pigs, we talked about this before, they usually have a passion for it. They're like kids. If you like kids, you like pigs. And it was also the time that the structural change in the industry was going from independent family farmers with multiple choices of selling their pork to you either have no choices or go to an integrator. And so I talked to some of the farmers that wanted to make that transition. That led me over to the European Union to study the alternative marketing of pork and how co-ops work, and brought that model back. And we did start a co-op. We learned along the way that for us it worked better, that we got over this bit about we can't trust anybody else in the value chain system, because we needed good managers and people that knew about processing. And so in fact, a great friend of mine, Phil Gatto, who is in the crowd tonight, that we actually got together, and what I'm trying to say is we incorporated and joined forces with knowledgeable expertise in the other parts of the value chain and created Heritage Foods, which basically today a group of nearly 90 farmers are participating, supplying 1,200 pigs per week through what I call a vertically coordinated system, where we don't necessarily own all aspects, but we coordinate together. It's a soil to plate type concept. We market pork to the likes of regional and Whole Foods in Costco and Chipotle and places like that. So we're really proud of that. Proud of the visionary aspects that, what we actually did, I feel, or what we do is we marry heirloom type of practices that our great-grandfathers, for instance, implemented with, modern technology and information to create, in the end, our goal is to create the safest, healthiest, best tasting pork while being able to make it affordable and accessible to the masses in a very sustainable, humane way. And so we're doing that on our farms. We're, even what we feed, our organization has made a commitment to go completely non-GMO feedstuffs. We're totally antibiotic free. Our farmers, I think it was Chip that was talking about the healthy fat aspects. Mm-hmm. One of our slogans is you are what you eat eats. And we believe that this whole healthy fats and protein is kind of something that we feel obligated to supply our consumers with. And so, again, the heirloom aspect is about the breed, and we use breeds and combinations of more of the heirloom type breeds that can raise hogs in more natural conditions. The feed or the pure whole grains that we try to grow as much on our farm as possible without the additives. And then the simple, practical need for great humane in consideration of the animals, so in the environment.
Very, very inspiring. Thank you. Yeah. And then Rose, could I ask you to give some backstory on yourself?
Sure. Before I begin, I want to first express our deepest gratitude to the Berkeley Institute and the sponsors, because it is the collaboration of this effort that will bring change to make our world a better place. My husband Ward and I, before I say anything else, we were on this panel together, and we've spoke at other panels together, and so we were kind of trying to prepare, well, are you going to go first or shall I, and this and that. So we were talking back and forth. I said, well, I'll start and you can finish. And then right now, before I got up here, he said, well, make sure you leave some time for me to finish with something. So for sure, I'm going to start and then have Ward. We're a family partnership, and we have been blessed. We have a very rich heritage. Both my parents came from New Mexico in a ranching community. Still have 2 little town names after our family. And I grew up with the love of the land from a very early age. The stories my dad would talk about with beef cattle and horseback riding across the plains of New Mexico. I met my husband Ward at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. I was an animal science major, and taking the horse training class, and Ward's grandmother and my roommate's grandmother were second cousins, and the 2 grandmothers were writing letters. You know, hardly anyone writes letters these days, but back in those days, they wrote letters and said, you need to meet each other's grandchildren. So Ward came over, saw my saddle, and that was the beginning of our relationship and our journey. And with so many other things that have been said, yes, last night and today, for us too, it's a journey. I don't think we'll ever be done learning in our lifetime. And I'm really glad that we've been able to be open-minded in our relationship together with our family, to have an openness, to always be listening for new opportunities to learn. So with that, Ward and I, as I said, had been blessed with his family's legacy here in California of being in the dairy business over 100 years. And today we're partners with our children on between owned and leased land, about 8,000 acres, that we have all converted to organic in the last 10 years. We have 1 more block of almonds that is in its 3rd year of transition. And in our operation, I've said we have the ABCs of organic. So we have almonds, beef, we have cheese and chickens, and pasture organic eggs. And then we have a menagerie of things in the middle that keep us happy. And I was going to talk about the sustainability on my perspective, that happy is not only being profitable, but healthy for the health of our family, our relationships, our animals, our land, and for the planet. For me, it encompasses all. So with our products, our newest one now is the olive oil. And of our dairies, we have a unique system that is not like any other. We're a seasonal grass-based dairy. So generally, if people ask us, what we do or what we are, we'll first say we're grass farmers, because as Nathan had talked about earlier with Alan Savory, those are tools for intensive management grazing, but it's also about time, and there's so many other factors. So I say that our dairies are designed with simplicity, as nature, God intended, and with that, we are working in coordination with Mother Nature. So I'll let Ward talk about the seasonality of our dairies. Our milk is sold through Organic Valley. And I wanted to say earlier a comment about how difficult it is for the next generation and how important it is to bring in the next generation. And had Organic Valley not had the tools for us to have the confidence to go organic, we wouldn't be here sitting here today, and we wouldn't have changed our whole life structure, because we had veterinarians, we had agronomists, we had soil scientists, we had all the support. And it's a very scary thing when you have gone to the university and you're told to use this antibiotic and these chemicals, and when you take your tool chest away, you want to know, okay, where are those tools that you're going to use? Luckily for me, with my Native American background, I knew that the earth provided everything that we need in terms of herbs, essential oils. So with Dr. Paul from Organic Valley, the support that we had, he was able to help us bridge that transition to organic. And all of our other products are marketed under our flagship of the name Burroughs Family Farms. And please visit us on either Organic Valley's website or our family website to learn more about what we're doing. And Ward, I was hoping you could maybe now talk about your transition from conventional to organic.
Sure. It's interesting how similar all three of us, all three of our families have the path that we've taken. I too was a conventional farmer for 30 years, or you're not, yeah, you're about my age anyway. 30 years of really not knowing what I didn't know. That's how I put it. And it's been a really interesting journey. So then 10 years ago, you know, we started on this organic path. You know, we dabbled in it when we raised our kids, and we knew it was the right thing to do. But for whatever reason, we hadn't, you know, mentally, I just couldn't get past all the obstacles as there were, the way I saw it. We were going through a business split, though. I was partners with my dad and my brother, and for these 30 years, and we had this tremendous producing conventional dairy. It's still there. My brother and his family have it, and it's right on the same farm that my dad put together in the 70s. I was born and raised in the East Bay. You know, it's interesting because I don't come up here to the Bay Area much. My grandfather came from Illinois in 1889 or something, and he came right here, you guys, to this Oakland Berkeley Hills. And that's where he started dairying as a 20 or 25-year-old man. Before he got married, he met my grandmother. She went to Cal here and knew his sisters, and then went out to the Delta. I don't know how many of you know where Brentwood or Oakley. I went to grammar school in Oakley out there. And that was a great dairying area. Of course, now it's full of houses and people. And in the early 70s, my dad went down to the valley and found this place. And so if he hadn't done that then, now it's covered with nuts. Almonds and walnuts are ruling the world out in the valley. I don't know how many of you know that. But so where dairies were 10 years ago, dairies were the king, and now they're not. You know, but what we've done is we got infatuated with grass. I was in the 1970s. I went to my brother and we agreed to work together, and we were partners, like I said, for 30 years. And he didn't want to have anything to do with the farm. He didn't know anything about farming, and in fact, he was a Cal major, mathematics major, econ. And but his heart was in the farm. So anyway, I said I would do the farming if he would run the dairy 365 days a year, 3 times a day, you know, milking, all that 24/7 deal. I didn't want any part of it. And but I said I wanted the beef cattle, and so that was where this whole connection with grass came. I put lots of poisons and toxins on the ground, you know, not realizing what I was doing, but it all happens for a reason. Today we're doing you know, things that the way I always put it, there's a right way and there's a wrong way to do things, and of course in our hearts we're doing things the right way, and that's the thank God for that. We actually have 2 dairies managed by our son-in-law and our daughter, and then the other one's a son and his wife, and they're both about 500 cows. Which, you know, for the dairy industry in California are very, very small in California. For the in Organic Valley, you know, I don't know how many of you know this, but our average dairy is about 80 or 90 cows. So for Organic Valley, then there's bigger dairies in the West. That's the way that just it's happened that way. We do make a little cheese, but 99% of our milk is sold through Organic Valley. We also have an almond business. The almonds are, you know, 90% of the world's almonds come from that area right there. And one of the things that we're doing, though, is doing some multi-species work, grazing, where we're following dairy cows that whole management intensive grazing thing that Cindy brought up and some of the others have talked about, we go through with the milk cows, and then sometimes we come through with a follower group of heifers, and then the chickens, and it's really interesting to see what's going on. This will be the second summer that we've done that. We're also using the orchards and the orchard floors in the winter and the springtime of the year for the same kind of habitat for these hens. We get the winter rains, and the orchard floors have this wonderful high quality grass that before all we did was have to mow. You have to mow it. Well, we're trying to use it. We've even run the smaller animals, the smaller heifers on that kind of situation too. Multi species though in that situation. There's nobody really in our area that's doing that. Very few have done it. So we're on the cutting edge. We've made some mistakes, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's where we are. We're out in the hot weather. That's a big negative, and our other big challenge is our water, and we're not, and we're using underground water, and that's both a plus and a minus, and it's something that we're going to pay for down the road. I don't know if anybody really has that all figured out.
If I could interrupt right now, when you talked about that, it was brought up last night and again today. And this whole idea about open space and rangeland. But there's absolutely a symbiotic relationship between the land, the grass, and the cows. And that whole carbon sequestering and grazing at the right time. But one thing that I don't think the conventional minded agricultural person understands is that we need this rangeland and grassland for replenishing the aquifers. And when we have rains in the winter, we need that grass to be able to replenish. And so I think that that's one of the most beautiful things is that we can do is to protect our native ground and our rangeland and continue to have open space with grass.
There's actually a literacy moment here where there's a move away from the phrase open space to working landscapes. And that working land may just simply be harvesting rainwater and slowly infiltrating and recharging aquifers. So I have a couple quick questions. What's the difference between an almond and an almond?
I could answer that for you. Almonds are on the tree, and when you harvest them, you shake the L out of them.
Thank you. And then just a personal question now. I've heard that pigs are smart. Is this true?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Most pigs are smarter than a lot of humans that I work with.
Thank you for that. So, I think. So the work I'm involved with is pretty interesting, and we have several research projects happening at one time. And one of them, we got excited about compost in a big way on my ranch. And compost is really interesting. It turns out that you can compost anything that was ever alive. And that's what we're experimenting with. We've been composting human waste now for 3 years on a state-licensed, county-permitted research project on my ranch, and it's going really well. The reason we're able to do that is because we're working with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab using a technology that's called the phylochip. And it's a microarray that has 1.1 million programmable sites for the DNA of all bacteria on Earth. And using this technology, we're able to follow the destruction of pathogens during the compost process. And so what I'm personally observing is that science is amazing, and it's my thinking that science is incredibly powerful as a measurement and a monitoring exercise, but not necessarily modifying. And so what I think you guys have been describing is as a culture in the 50s, when we were charged with feeding the world, and we rose to that occasion, we relied more and more on technologies and hard systems. And what we're all going through is a character arc now, where we're going back towards softer, leaky biological systems. But we have the ability to measure those with this high-resolution science. It's a pretty exciting moment for me to see this transition that we're experiencing here. So on that background, and my earlier remarks about boundaries, working with the ability to observe the boundaries of your system and trying to be sustainable within that. Is there an order this is random here. So, Will, in your system, how many inputs do you bring from outside that you assume or are externalized inputs compared to what you are working within the system, and then what's your product? Are you in balance within that, and how do you measure those things?
My hero is Dr. George Washington Carver. He says many great things, but the thing that I think is most profound is in nature there is no waste. And we endeavor to run our farm and processing plants at zero waste. And this may sound like bragging, but I'm real proud of it. We compost all the waste from our plants. If it's not red meat or poultry or hides, it's compost. And we use the Cornell University dead animal composting system, which I think makes the best compost in the world. And we apply it to our pastures. Since I started doing that, I mean, I got the papers to show it. Our pastures have gone from less than 0.5% organic matter to over 5% organic matter. And you can see it at 60 miles an hour driving down the road. But I can show you the analysis too. We make we in the process of making that compost, we found that the fat was problematic. Anything that lives will compost, but fat doesn't compost very well. So we started making biodiesel, and we're just about to be at the point where we can make all our diesel fuel, except what little bit it takes to mix with it to make it work. We're very excited about that. We also make soap from the glycerin that comes out of it. We have a 50,000 watt solar voltaic array that helps power the plants. We obviously save the hides, sell them to the tanner, but we're also using vegetable tanning to tan hides. We aren't worth a damn at that yet, but we're working on it. We got high hopes. What else do we do? We have solar thermal, which is low tech. Even I get that. Solar voltaic, not so much, but a number of other things. But I wish I wish somebody was interested in doing a study. I believe that our farm is a carbon sink. If you do the arithmetic, I'm going from 0.5% to 5% organic matter on 2,500 acres. That's a lot of carbon, and it came from up there. I mean, we probably do some more things, but I can't think. We don't buy much stuff. We buy packaging. We just don't buy much stuff. We have over 100 employees. We pay a lot of labor. Everything we do is very labor intensive, but we don't buy much stuff.
How many years did it take you to do that? 0.5% to buy?
95 to now. And, I know that's way quicker than what you say, but now I get 60 inches of rain a year. It's a lot of, and it's near the Gulf of Mexico. Have a lot of radiation. There's a lot. Things happen much faster there, whether it's breaking down or building up, if it's managed.
Well, take this as a compliment. I think you described yourself as a rock star.
It's a slow day for rock stars.
How about a soil star?
Yes, he's a star.
Yeah.
Some kind of star. Thank you. So touching back on that research I'm doing with composting, working with Dr. Gary Anderson at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, I came to understand that in these biological systems, when something goes towards one population of something, that's actually the definition of disease. And then after that is death. And so the system we're coming out of agriculturally was pushing things towards a single species or monoculture, which is not really our best choice. And what we're doing now is going back towards diversity and biodiversity. And that's expressing itself both in terms of the populations of plants and animals, but also probably in your cultural experiences too, in terms of your community, and I would expect things like that. Switching to Russ here. So the boundaries, I had the same question for you then. Basically, the boundaries of your system. Do you import a lot of things relative to what you export?
No, for one thing, the adage about using everything but the squeal, yeah, we use the squeal too. So And it starts on the farm. First of all, our philosophy and mentality is that it is about diversification and about holistic. And you see where the industry has gone to specialization. And sometimes when I go into some of those lands in, say, northern Iowa, for instance, where they just specialize in monocrops, say, for instance, corn, and they've got some confined turkey and hog operations in some of the more pristine areas in southeastern United States. It just doesn't make sense. And so, we're going back to the way that Grandpa and great-grandpa did, were diversification. The other thing, on that same note, there was a study that National Hog Farmers put out about 20 years ago that talked about that areas that went away from diversified hog and livestock operations with crop, the distance between towns was highly correlated with that migration away from that. In other words, the specialized area, the towns were like 40 miles apart, and where you had diversity, the towns were 10 miles apart. So that's important to humans, very important. And so on our farms, we're diversified, meaning that, and for instance, my particular farm, I don't grow all of my own grains. We do use some grains in our livestock production, but we have neighbors that we make alliances with. And what's so good about that, with this whole idea about the soil, the plate concept, is that we can control those inputs and control what they grow, or at least coordinate what they grow. I said earlier that we're committed to 100% non-GMO and organic feeds and starch of the soil. I'm fortunate to have a brother that's a pretty renowned soil microbiologist that. We study exactly the living matter of the soils, and we keep that earthworm and biological matter going and improve our organic matter, like Will talks. We also compost and have found ways to make sure that we don't lose any of those nutrients. We balance our rations with micro minerals to make sure that the soil health is adequate down to the micronutrients. And so it is a balanced approach. We use not just pigs, but we also have cattle on our farm, and we have some other things. But then we rotate things. Somebody mentioned on the scientific panel about most of our farms are small. We have a lot of biosecurity and a lot of natural barriers to diseases in the Ozarks where I'm from, and so. Some of what we're looking at and applying is the fodder system, for instance, where we're utilizing more off of our land from smaller acreages and using the non-GMO and organic. And then we too have coordinated effort with our plan. We're actually developing a community-based plant that's going to be totally off the grid, using both anaerobic digestion and solar. And the huge thing about the pork thing is to utilize those co-products, so to speak, for pharmaceutical uses, pet food uses, but also biofuel uses. And so in the end, it's a very holistic model.
That's impressive. One detail on that: do you import food waste from local restaurants and markets?
You mean the feedback to the hogs? Yeah. We do not. I mean, we import some of that to build compost for our soils. The problem with that, and we've looked into that, the problem is some of the meat byproducts that's mixed with the garbage, so to speak, and we do want to stay with that. Again, we want to control the health aspects of the protein, the fat, the end.
Yeah, I didn't think about the meat.
Sure, I'll let Ward talk about the compost. There are several things that we're doing on our farm, but I wanted to say, again, it's not a one thing of boundaries, it's a holistic approach. And your operation is only as good as your weakest link. And so from the microbes in the soil to your employees, everything that's part of your web of life needs to be cared for and taken care of and treated with respect. And one of the things that I'm really most proud of is that the dreams that Ward and I started with have been expanded far beyond anything we ever dreamed was possible with our children. And our children now are carrying on our legacy and expanding it. So our daughter, she came up to us and said, and we've always provided meat for our employees. And we have great benefits, we have housing. And she said, Mom, Dad, I just know organic is the way everyone needs to be eating. And I want to make sure that all of our employees, I love your your cookhouse and your ranch house. At the whole home farm, we had a cookhouse, fed everyone 3 meals a day. But on the ranch that we're on now, Benina said, I want to just make sure that not only are we giving our employees great beef, organic beef to eat, but that also that we have a community garden and we have an array of fruit trees that are available to year round as the fruit comes off. So one of the things that we have looking to the future for boundaries and sustainability is looking at our cost. We have, with significant investment over the last 3-4 years, we have installed 10 different solar sites for all of our different operations, our 2 dairies and the almonds. And that solar system produces about 80% of all our power needs for our cost of electricity. And we've done different things as our journey has taken us from electric to gas to diesel to back to electric and now solar. So it's continuing to trying to use the best technologies to support a long-term sustainable operation for our future generations. And in terms of biodiversity and implementing different things, we've done foliar feeding and compost tea to enhance and kickstart the biology. But I agree with some of the earlier statements that were said that there is a time factor, that it does take some time to build the soil. You want to talk about the compost?
Sure. Well, we operate on granite-based soils over in the east side of the northern San Joaquin Valley there, and water intake rates are always low. It doesn't take, those kind of soils don't take water very well, and very low organic matters. I mean, we're less than 0.5%. Or originally, we're lucky though to be 1.5 today. That's just it's always been a challenge to try to get those. I always used manures as a part of the fertility program in my conventional days, and so I knew the value of that kind of a program. My brother today doesn't have enough ground to put his dry manure on. I mean, 10 years ago that was apparent, and so he needed to export it from his farm, which is across the fence from ours. So we've been taking that and making compost for about 10 years. There's a product called almond trash that comes out of the almond hullers. It's the leaves and the sticks and the grass that comes when they pick the almonds up, and it's a problem for them. So we would mix that with our manure, and that was what our composts are made out of. We're using another byproduct now. But all of the cardboard that's used on the ranch it's not a lot, but you get deliveries from that. We just have a big trailer, and so all of the people that live on the ranch they're not made, but they're encouraged, of course, to compost just like you're doing here anywhere. That's coming from, it originally came from the next generation. I wasn't smart enough to figure it all out. But that's some of the things that we're doing. We don't have a closed system, don't get me wrong. We feed a little grain, we feed some grain to our cows. Cindy talked about soil inputs, and those we bring in. Whether it comes in, whether calcium or some of the micronutrients come in as grain, or whether we bring them in as lime or gypsum. That's what's supplying our soil. We do bring in some hay, but for the most part, our cows, are at that 70% dry matter intake level from grass from our farms, and that's what's our bread and butter.
Our cows also have, and our calves have free choice. We have different nutrients, so we have kelp, and we have aloe at different times of the year when they might need that, and humates, so that our cows are actually fertilizing and building the soil, but it's in a slower rate when it's going through the cow than back onto the land.
So that may apply to all of you in terms of the access to minerals and nutrients, free choice compared to what you were administering to them. Have you all gone through that same transition where you just give them the choice?
The big thing that we're doing is, yes, we're trying to use more naturally occurring rather than the supplementation. But what's great about this is that we talk especially about the antibiotic issue where people use subtherapeutic antibiotics and increase efficiency and production rates. Since 1989, we basically can tell the critics that you have to have that and the food will go up, and that's wrong. In other words, we've been able to experience those same results in production and efficiencies and death loss. In fact, my mortality rate on my farm is less than 1% after post-weeding, which is, somebody told me that was better than the human mortality rate. The fact of the matter is that you can use those alternatives, the herbs and the enzymes and the probiotics to do that. And so we're trying to do that more naturally occurring on our farms and including the, for hogs and poultry, using those low lignin type of grasses, for instance, that are ruminant people are using. So finding very good results there.
Will, in terms of transitioning from using medicines to allowing the animals to select what they might need.
When I was a conventional cattleman, monoculture of cattle, I wanted a monoculture of Tifton 85 Bermuda grass. Tifton 85 Bermuda grass was developed by the University of Georgia. It can utilize up to 400 units of nitrogen a year. It's just a nitrogen hog. And if you pour the chemical nitrogen to it, it makes incredible forage. Nutrient balance, probably not so good. So you give them a lot of minerals and other things to make that work. But we would, if it lived in my any plant in my pastures that wasn't Tifton 85 Bermuda grass, I put poison on it to kill it. And I wanted nothing out there, that's the plant side. On the animal side, nothing but a cow. Any insect, anything that's out there that I could kill, I would kill it. I'd spray something on it. And that's a monoculture of plant monoculture. And during that era, I was also confinement feeding. So I shut my cows up, fed them corn and soy. Of course, you have to be really careful about balancing the ration with other things because corn and soy aren't a natural diet for cattle. So we've gone from that. I can spend a lot of time talking about transition, but today, we make this great compost I'm so proud of. And we don't feed cows. The Tifton 85 died. When I quit putting 400 pounds of chemical nitrogen on it a year, it couldn't compete. It was unnatural. So other species took over. So today we've just got this smorgasbord of plants out there. And the cows don't eat some of it, but it's okay. Sheep will, goats will, something else will eat it. It's okay, I don't care. We got one or two things we have to dig, thistles.
Eat them early.
But today what we do is we make this great compost. We feed the microbes in the soil. The microbes feed the soil feeds the plants. Cows eat the plant, livestock eats the plants. And it's way better. And when you're on that natural system, you don't have to worry so much about balancing rations because they were created or evolved, I don't care which one you want to go with, to eat this natural diet. And when you do that, you quit having to go to the GNC and buy little bottles of shit to give them to make it.
There you are. So why don't you
sure,
one last comment? Thank you, though. That was great.
There was two things I wanted to mention on this subject. One is that on our dairies and on our grazing practices, we have diversity because diversity is the key to health. And one of the things, it's a very simple concept, but people just don't realize grass isn't just grass. You've got grass, you've got legumes. Someone earlier mentioned weeds. Well, weeds aren't all weeds. I mean, weeds are seed for birds, for beneficial insects, for pollinators. But what's really beautiful about this diversity is the depth of the roots. So you have some grasses that are certain length down, and you have others that are very, very deep-rooted plants that might be 15 feet deep. And so depending on what minerals the animal might need, leaving it to them to decide what is important for their diet and health, they will pick and choose. And like you said earlier, you know, it doesn't matter what they're eating today. They might not need that today, but they might need it tomorrow or next year or whenever it might be. But if you give them a free choice, they will be healthy. For us, the concept of health is about prevention. It's no stress. It's about, we have the Happy Cows of California. Matter of fact, on our brand, we have a happy face. And how do you measure or test or do research on happiness for animals? We've had many, many tours. We give tours to throughout the world. We have people that come from different countries, from different universities, from different colleges and local grammar schools. And that's the one thing that people always say is, you know, they'll say, wow, your cows just look happy. And it's true. I mean, you can see stress on an animal or the way they behave if they're in confinement. You know, they might just shake or rock.
And let me interrupt. They can see it on you too.
Sure, absolutely, including wasp. You can't be afraid of wasp when you walk outside. They'll come and get you. But I wanted to also share about our calving, and that is that we have a New Zealand mob-style form of calving. So our calves are raised in a group. And I like your statement, I don't want to brag. My dad used to say, it's not bragging, it's just fact. But we have had less than a 0.5% death loss on our calves for the last 10 years since we've been organic. And maybe you could talk a little bit about our calf rearing.
Well, merit is the key to calf raising. You need a woman to raise calves, basically. But our calves are raised in groups, like Rosie said. And that's, of course, against all conventional wisdom, which they want to raise calves individually. And that's fine, they're okay. Nutrition is health, so we feed lots and lots of milk to our calves. And for a much longer period of time than what's out there normally. The calves nurse on a group feeder, and they are very, very healthy. They get their colostrum, and then within the second or third day they're nursing on this group feeder. But we give them 2 gallons of milk a day, which is a lot of organic milk, and a lot of it, you know, could go in the truck to be in your milk bottle, but it isn't, because of course that's the future of our dairies are those calves. But it's been very, very successful for us. It works very well when you got a lot of calves all being born at the same time, and especially as we're doing that in the winter and early spring, before the flies and before the smell, and by the time the hot weather comes, we're done with that, and they're weaned, and then they're on grass and a little bit of grain, and away they go. Anybody wants to ask questions, see us after.
Yeah, this is probably a good time for...
One of our other dairies, it's actually named Full Circle Dairy, back to the same concept of coming back around 100 years back to the notion of grazing. But on that dairy, for the last couple of years, we've been doing some studies of trials of leaving the calves with the cows. We did a small group a couple years ago, and then another one last year, and this year we've left our calves on our cows, and we're going to see how that works out.
Everyone's happier.
Yeah.
So we'll take some questions now.
Thank you so much. That was so informative. I have a question about your transition from antibiotic, hormone, pork to now natural, healthy, antibiotic-free, everything else super awesome on the farm. I'm wondering, huge rebuttal to this idea that we need to go antibiotic and hormone-free is that we can't produce enough meat cheaply enough, and that it's just not cost effective. And obviously we know that there's a lot of important benefits and costs that are not factored into the system. But I'm wondering, just purely from an economic standpoint, can you share with us a little bit about what the economics of that whole transition look like, and in terms of your profit margins and in terms of the cost to consumers? How much higher is the cost of the meat, and then what's the profit differential that going from that system to this other system?
I appreciate that question. First of all, I don't think I'd be here if I thought that this system wasn't more sustainable and less cost overall, both internal and external. And so, and you're right. You always get those critics that say that, and they think that this kind of farming is just made for a couple of granola-eating hippies in the corner somewhere. But the fact of the matter is that I think it should be mainstream worldwide. And that's why we're building these models to prove that. In my particular situation, when I went that route, and I'll tell you I guess the pros and the cons. I'll go with the cons first. Feed efficiency-wise, as far as the amount of overall feed that it takes to put on a pound of gain is usually a little worse in our type of system, primarily because we take selection pressure off of. You got to know that in the late 80s that the industry basically tried to chickenize the pork industry, by getting away from quality and structure and the humane aspects of pigs and turning them into these widgets that make efficient protein. And that's not the way, it takes away a lot of the humane considerations as well as meat quality. And so you scrap that, and you select hogs that can raise pigs, for instance, without the crutch of a crate. And so you have to give up a little bit. And so that's basically what we gave up. On the other hand, as I told you, my mortality rate is less than 1% compared to the industry's 5%, for instance. The actual costs to produce or to build the facilities are less in our system because of when we use bedding for that natural instinct in bedding, you don't have to have the elaborate facilities that are well insulated. We do use natural ventilations, and we use the automatic feed system, but our cost there is less. Even the longevity of our breeding stock, for instance, in this disposable world, and I know you got it in your dairy industry and the Leghorn hen industry. It's all about getting this fast, massive production quickly out of there. And our particular animals, instead of being around for a year and a half, they're around for 7 or 8 years, and so that's less of a cost. Bottom line is and then even labor. When some people ask me, does it cost more labor to produce something like that? For one thing, it's a lot more fun because you're in a better environment. But number two is that we don't have to clip teeth. We don't clip tails. I don't even vaccinate because my pigs are that healthy. Don't use antibiotics, and I don't have to worry about dragging mortalities off every day. And so in ways that thing's labor. I told you I saved $16,000 the first year in my moderate size operation of 1,200 head per year in my operation. So $16,000 savings on vet and med costs alone. In the end, and as far as pigs per sow per year, in England, which I'm going to go over there to learn a few things later this summer, but actually that is the prominent way to raise pigs, the way that I'm raising them, and they're competing with the conventional systems there, and most of our producers are too. And so I will tell you that the bottom line is that overall we are as efficient and as cost effective as the larger operations. The number one thing when you ask, well, why do you expect that premium? And in the end, we expect a moderate premium, primarily because we don't want to raise or refuse to raise those massive numbers on a concentrated area. And we also want to bring in the next generation. So in other words, we have to have at least some fair living wage rather than the razor-thin margins that the conventional system is to do that. That's how we justify, that's how we need that little bit of a premium. But overall, we're just as efficient, and we will feed the world with this type of agricultural system.
Nice.
I work with Russ, and I guess I came from the further processing. I think the answer is kind of twofold. What is the cost to raise this food? It is more expensive. And so I guess as a consumer, all of us would say, hey, I don't want to pay that much. But how do we define cost? Cost of raising an animal or cost of raising a crop? I think you have to offset that with the cost of healthcare. if the animals are more healthy and we're more healthy, I would say, and part of this is anecdotal, probably our medical costs and our health would be far offset what we're going to pay for food. If we're talking about, in the previous comments, some of the obesity, and I grew up in a time where, an 8-ounce Coke was big, and then the 16-ounce Coke came out, and as a high school kid, that was more economic, because I could drink 2 of them, which probably one was too many. But I guess the question is, we have to maybe talk about the healthcare side, and because that could probably offset the cost of our food.
And the long-term environmental side for polluting our air, our soil, and our water.
Those are costs that we don't put in there, but I think we need to balance that as a perspective.
Okay, we have some more questions.
Hi, I'm Michael Keyes. It's been a pleasure. Could any of you, it doesn't matter who, think in your mind and tell us, at what point in time did you reach a milestone where you're saying, I'm over the hump here with this transition. I think I've got it.
I'll say a little bit about that, and I hope everyone else will add in too. But when you're working on the land and you're a steward of the land and you're on seeing the sunrises and sunsets, and you're seeing nature at its utmost beauty through the seasons, and then you become an organic farmer and you see abundant life. I'm talking about birds and butterflies and migratory birds and all these different species. I took a friend from the Audubon Society just on a very quick tour through the ranch. And in less than an hour, we saw over 40 species of birds. And every year we find new birds that are flying into our place, from the mountain bluebirds to bald eagles that have come in now.
I get more rocks thrown at me than anybody can imagine, because the industry really, especially it seems like the pig industry, is really sensitive and defensive to the style of agriculture. They just don't think it's normal. I felt I was over the hump within the first year. Personally, that this system would work. I had to defy the skeptics, but I never stopped believing in what I was doing, because it was the right thing to do. And knowing what my ancestors did and looking at the old books, I said, we're smart enough to figure this out, and there's a better way to do it. And so the end result, or just like we're all talking about, I like this word happy. The fact of the matter is that, the whole thing, if you really are dedicated to eliminating the fear, the stress, and the pain in these animals all the way to their maker, it's the right thing to do. And I never, ever second-guessed myself in what I was doing.
Hi, I'm Leah Atwood. Thanks so much for sharing all your stories. It's been very inspiring. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about your perspectives. Rosemary, you touched on this a little, but as leaders in sustainable livestock and food systems, what you think are some of the biggest challenges and gaps in succession planning for the future generation, and what you think what your thoughts are on potential solutions and strategies to bridge those gaps.
One of the things that our family has had the opportunity to work with is a lot of consultants, good succession planners, financial advisors for estate planning. I've heard too many horror stories of farmers and ranchers that didn't want to talk about death. They didn't want to plan for death, and they didn't want to upset one family member for the other how they were going to divide it up. They couldn't, so they didn't do anything. And when they died, they pretty much lost their farms to taxes, estate taxes. So planning for the future, planning for succession, using consultants, I think is absolute imperative to do, because it's very hard to do it by yourself. We've been working on this for years, and it's not easy. And I guess I have a good attitude about death, because I don't think death is an end. It's just another transition to another dimension. But there's so many people that do not want to talk about death or what's going to happen when they're gone. It's difficult. It's interesting that you asked that question, because yesterday on our way over here, we had a neighbor from Oregon, a young farmer, And he and his dad got into a squabble and he left. And he called us, and I'll get choked up because he said, I don't know what to do. I really know I need to help my dad, but we're not working, we don't have a good working relationship, and so we said, yeah, we can help you. So we called his dad, and we called a consultant, and we got them set up, and hopefully they'll get on the right path, at least get to the table to talk about things. But communication is the most important thing for succession planning, to make sure that everybody understands. I have a different opinion. I don't believe that everyone should have equal inheritance. I believe that those children that want to come into the farm are the ones that I want to bring into the farm. I don't want the farm broken up every year and dissipated over 4 generations where you just have a little itty-bitty piece that isn't sustainable for making a living. And if it's a toss of the coin, that would be okay with me, because I believe that the most important thing that we need to do is to make sure that we have a working business that's going to be profitable and sustainable and keeping it whole. As it was said last night, look at all the loss of acres that we're having every year, and we need to protect our farmland, our grazing land.
Comment?
Except fair and equal aren't the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just quickly, an issue that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm a former FFA advisor, by the way, and I know how some kids are very passionate about wanting to come. I believe that young people are our greatest asset for rural America, and in turn for society in general. The greatest thing, in my opinion, is access, is money. You know, we can talk about all the evils of money, but they need access to capital. And in our particular system, we are actually setting up micro lending programs and internships with our farmers to actually give them that start. We have marketing agreements that we assure a young farmer a guarantee for an opportunity for a profit, not a guarantee for profit, every single year through our system. With a modest investment, they can get to our program, raise some organic vegetables and things on the side. I will tell you that I know that investing $1 million into a vertically integrated system like raising turkeys for Cargill isn't the way to go. And I'm here today to tell you that we actually have farmers that are involved with integrators that want to scrap that contract and bring their young people on board with us and come into our system and scrap them and be a lot happier and a lot more profitable.
So we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
This question's, I guess, mostly for Russ. There's a lot of research around ruminant production and how ruminants can be used as a management tool in really innovative ways. On the hog side, because we're just removing ourselves from the vertically integrated industrial hog production on a larger scale, do you or any of the guys that you work with, are they coming up with really innovative production? You've talked about how we've moved away from antibiotics, how we've moved away from conventional feeds and things like that, but what about really innovative production systems? Like, what are your outdoor production systems look like, and what's the future of outdoor hog production?
Yes. Being from the conventional world, I mean, that means a lot to me, because I'm also pretty stubborn. I think we all are in a way. I'd like to defy the critics because I really believe in what we're doing. For instance, innovation on the farrowing style. And I told you before, we like to marry the old style with the new style. We have different types of farrowing floors and farrowing huts, for instance, that can have even less pre-weaning mortality, for instance. Get that pig crush down less than 10% on specially designed things. And you look at nature, for instance, you have huts that are along a hillside with these guardrails, and knowing that a normal hog, the one that's bred normally, will lay down with her udder down toward the hill where the pigs come out and gravitate toward, to a very protected place. But it's all about that. It's going back in time somewhat to select those genetic lines. In my opinion, that's improvement. That's increased technology by using those lines, using crossbreeding programs. When we talk about, to me, the problem with genetic modification was that we commercialized agriculture and then we threw patience out the window. I had professors, thank God, that I was associated with in school that had 30-year research programs where they were crossbreeding. They were using, for instance, landrace on Poland Chinas, which are two completely different types of hogs, and maximizing maternal heterosis, and they were weaning. This was back in 1963. They were weaning 11 pigs that were weighing 50 pounds. We were way ahead of what we got now with this so-called modern technology. So I guess maybe I answer that question by saying, we had learned we were pretty smart back then. Let's take some of that old and marry in with the technology, because I'm going to tell you, in our systems, in the end, we're going to show you that our efficiencies are very, very similar. Our survivabilities are better. We're using technology, for instance, on these wheatgrasses things. We're kind of like just scratching the surface on them, using different lignins and using flaxes, for instance, to alter the chemistry of the meat. Chip, you had a great one there about the 6-to-3 level. We've done some innovative things where we got that omega-3, omega-6 ratio in our pigs, close to what salmon is. And so you're going to be able to eat your bacon without any guilt. And and so I'm excited. When we talk about that, we've been accused of being laggards and Stone Age people, but I'm going to tell you what, I think that we're pretty dang innovative and progressive and leading edge type things that will show the world that this is the way to go.
We concur with the hybrid vigor. We use hybrid vigor cross genetics in our dairy cattle and our beef cattle. Hybrid vigor is amazing, instant success.
One more question here.
Yeah, really quick, and this is actually a good follow-up to that. Clearly, you guys are on the cutting edge of a lot of things in agriculture, and I'm curious how, over the years, your interactions with your neighbors, with those extension agents, with the colleges and university that told you that this wasn't the way to do it, how successful do you feel like you've been in getting the message back the other direction? Do you still feel like, they think you're niche operators that are selling pork to people who are willing to pay for it? I'd love to hear just a couple of quick stories about your interactions with your neighbors or with those people who, thought that you were doing it the wrong way and that it wasn't going to work.
Go ahead.
Being from a less progressive part of the country, it'd be in order for me to answer that. It's a little odd that all of us here came to this kinder, gentler agriculture from mainstream hardcore industrial. That doesn't happen much. Most of the people I interact with came here from somewhere else. My friends and neighbors accept me because they have to. I was there before they were there. I was a better industrial cattleman than they were. I weigh 240 pounds. They got to accept me, and we've made it work. They would love for me to have moved there from Delaware and weighed 160 pounds and failed miserably, but it didn't work out for them. We're now the largest privately owned full-time employer in our several county area. We've got, we hired a lot of those guys. A lot of those people work for us now with their sons or daughters or cousins. And there is I think, an acceptance of, that White Oak Pastures worked. But that said, there's not a hell of a long line behind us, going the same direction. And I get that. It's a big investment in every sense of the word.
It's very difficult. It's really hard to be out there. You're a target, and conventional ag, they don't want to hear it. We didn't want to hear it when we were conventional that we were doing things wrong, and so it makes it. I think when it's family, it's even harder. Actually, that's why we're in a business split that we went through, is because we wanted to bring our children into the business, and our partners, our family, didn't want to. And Ward's dad, for 4 years, we wanted to start our first grass-based dairy. He said, no, why do you want to go backwards? You guys, what's wrong with you? Here we had a dairy that was the top of our county, which was the top of the state, and that year was the top of the nation. We had the highest producing dairy in California and the nation. And Ward's dad could not understand why we would want to do a grass-based dairy where we're only going to get half the production of conventional ag. And it was really hard for Ward because he said, you know, it was difficult when you have families saying, why do you want to go backwards? I had to say that, Ward, we are going to do it. We're going to do it now because our daughter was going to leave the farm. And like you said, our future is the youth. And so I said, we'll do it ourselves right now. We'll separate from the family. So that was the beginning of a separation. And it's hard. And there are community ag groups that I belong to that my daughter would like me to quit. And I said, no, I can't, even though they don't want to hear what I have to say or what I stand for. But I'm a reminder that there's an alternative way. And if I would just leave one thing about change, we talked about how to make an impact and how to change the world, what we can do. If people would just stop eating GMO food, that would be the /1 change that would save our planet.
Real quick, coming from and maybe you guys can relate to this, but growing up as a young farmer, we relied on the pharmaceutical companies to give us our education. They brought us into a pig dinner that they actually fed us fried chicken to. And then they taught us that all these things are the magic answer. And my experience when we were trying to get this co-op going, as I talked to my alma mater, my land-grant institution, they said, you know, we got to help you because we're required to, but we don't believe in your system. You know, that's just kind of like something. And as much as I've lobbied and petitioned, I think the end thing, though, is to develop models of success. And I call them models of hope. And that a young person can see, a new farmer can see, that, hey, there's some money into this. We partnered with the other parts of the value chain, like Phil Gottel or whatnot. But you're right. The end thing is the greatest experience and thrill I have, and I'm going to have a chance to thank you all, is that relationship building with the consumer. You're the only hope for us, the last hope for us independent farmers that want to do the right thing. I mean, we're going to work on our end to keep a conscience in our farmers. But we need you. I just got back from Washington, D.C. with a coalition of different moms group. I mean, these moms groups are tremendous consumer groups where I can show that, hey, this is our, instead of being adversarial, the consumers are our partners. They're the people that pay our bills. They're the people that we got to align with. Let's build that relationship. And so I've taken that and I've gone into our farm families, you know, locally, in the moms are leading the charge too, and telling their husbands that what they're doing as far as using GM crops and antibiotics or whatnot is not sustainable. Change it because, by gosh, we've got young kids in our family. We want to feed them right too. So keep it up. Thank you very much for what you do.
Thank you, everyone.
For us.
That was wonderful. Thank you guys too.
Before we close, I just want to again thank our moderators and all the panelists. So from earlier this morning and this last panel was just fantastic. So, and before we close, I just also want to thank all of you for coming. We really appreciate your being here. And I know many of you are very actively involved in different aspects of sustainable agriculture and food systems as advocates, as consumers, as researchers, and as producers. So, you know, it's great to have all of you come together, and that's what BFI, the Berkeley Food Institute, is really involved in helping to facilitate this kind of dialogue. I also have to mention that we know that, of course, university systems haven't always been friendly or helpful to this kind of agriculture, but I think there have been some changes happening, and we're really pleased that at the Berkeley Food Institute, we actually have 85 affiliated faculty members. And many of them are working on different dimensions of sustainable food systems. So that's an exciting thing. And actually, we have many pioneers who've been working on agroecology and organic agriculture going back about 20 years, often with difficulties. But we hope that you know, we're recognizing that that's changing, partly with the, you know, in collaboration with working with producers like yourselves and others in this broader movement. So we're excited to be part of that, and really glad that you could come today. And BFI will continue next year. This is our last event of this year in the Food Exchange series, but in the fall, and we'll be continuing these series on a monthly basis. So if you haven't signed up for our website and our listserv, you can get those notices on our monthly events on different topics, having to do different hot topics that are very timely on these issues. So please sign up for that. And Thank you again also to NRDC and to the Organic Valley for helping to co-sponsor this and put this on. And I also want to thank Rosalie Fanchel, Rosalie there, yes, and Nora Gilbert, who've done a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes to make this happen. And so let's have one last round of applause for all of you.